In the opulent ballroom of Rosewood Manor, a woman in a housekeeper's uniform was about to shatter every assumption her guests held about power and privilege. What started as an elegant engagement party took a shocking turn when they came face to face with devastating truth. Sofia Castellanos wasn't your typical domestic worker. For 2 years, she had spent her life orchestrating the perfect deception, known for her strategic brilliance and photographic memory. When she encountered Marcus dismissing her as just the maid, she had no idea she was walking into her moment of liberation. Sofia responded with a revelation that would lead to exposed criminal networks. What began as heartbreak would become justice. The Hamptons would never be the same after one heiress reclaimed her power. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The grandfather clock in Rosewood Manor's entrance hall chimed 5:30 as Sofia Castellanos moved silently through the marble corridors, her worn sneakers making no sound against the polished floors. Dawn hadn't yet touched the estate's windows, and the sprawling mansion held that peculiar quiet of wealth at rest, a silence so complete it seemed manufactured. She paused at the base of the grand staircase, her calloused fingers trailing along the mahogany banister she'd polished countless times. 2 years of this elaborate performance, and still the irony wasn't lost on her. The heiress cleaning her own home while her boyfriend slept upstairs, oblivious to the truth beneath his roof. The morning routine had become second nature. Kitchen first. Coffee brewing for when Marcus finally stirred, fresh flowers arranged in the dining room, yesterday's newspapers folded and placed precisely where Harris and Wellington expected to find them. Sofia moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory guiding her through tasks she'd mastered not from necessity, but from obsession with authenticity. Her parents would have laughed at the spectacle. Miguel and Carmen Castellanos, who'd built their tech empire from a garage in East Palo Alto, watching their daughter play housemaid in the Hamptons. The thought brought its familiar ache. They'd been gone 3 years now, but grief still caught her unexpectedly. "You're up early again." Sofia didn't startle. James Chen had that quality. The ability to appear without announcement, as if materialized from the manor's shadows. At 68, the head butler moved with the silent grace of someone who'd spent decades observing the wealthy without being observed in return. "Couldn't sleep," she said, not turning from the roses she was arranging. "Thought I'd get a head start on the preparations." James studied her with those perceptive dark eyes that missed nothing. He'd seen through her disguise within a week of her arrival, though he'd never said so directly. Instead, he'd become her unlikely ally, offering guidance disguised as instruction and protection masked as professional courtesy. "The engagement party," he said quietly. "You know what tonight means." Sofia's hands stilled on the stems. Yes, she knew. Marcus would propose to Victoria Sterling in the ballroom, where Sofia had first danced with him 18 months ago, where she'd fallen for his easy charm and devastating smile, before she understood that charm was just another commodity in his world. "I've prepared everything he requested," she said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. "The Dom Perignon is chilled. The string quartet will arrive at 6. Victoria's preferred roses are throughout the ballroom." James moved closer, his weathered hands helping arrange the flowers with surprising delicacy. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." The memory surfaced unbidden, her first day at Rosewood Manor, nervous in her borrowed uniform, clutching fabricated references. She'd expected to observe the wealthy-like specimens in a terrarium. Instead, she'd encountered Marcus in the garden, dirt on his hands from replanting his mother's prized orchids, laughing at his own incompetence with genuine self-deprecation. For a moment, he'd seemed real. Human. Someone who might care about her thoughts on economics or sustainable technology. Someone who might see Sofia Castellanos, not just the helpful woman who folded his shirts. The illusion had lasted exactly 14 months before reality reasserted itself. "Miss Sofia." James's voice carried a paternal warmth that threatened her composure. "You don't have to do this to yourself. Not tonight." Before she could respond, Marcus's voice drifted from the study, muffled but distinct through the heavy oak doors. Sofia's enhanced memory, a gift inherited from her tech genius father, caught every word despite the distance. "Victoria, darling, everything's perfect. The ring is magnificent, The setting is romantic, and by midnight you'll be wearing my family's ancestral engagement ring." Sofia's hands clenched around the rose stems, thorns biting into her palms. She'd seen that ring, had admired it when Margaret Wellington showed her the family heirlooms, describing each piece's history while Sofia dusted the display cases. The irony tasted bitter. She owned the mansion, but Marcus possessed the symbols of belonging she'd never have. "The proposal will be flawless," Marcus continued, his voice carrying that confident charm that had once made her pulse quicken. "Father's invited all the right people. It'll be the social event of the season." Through the study door, his voice continued its casual cruelty. "Oh, don't worry about Sofia. She's sweet enough, but she knows her place. It's not like she has expectations." The words hit like physical blows. Sofia had heard variations before, but never so dismissively. Never with such casual certainty about her insignificance. She thought of the shell companies that had been quietly funding the estate's maintenance, the anonymous donations that had kept the Wellington family from losing their ancestral home. Marcus lived in luxury, sustained by her money while discussing her like furniture. James's hand touched her shoulder with infinite gentleness. "You deserve better than this." Sofia looked around the morning room. Her morning room, though none of them knew it. Sunlight was beginning to stream through windows she'd purchased along with everything else. The oriental rugs, the priceless art, the very roof over their heads. All hers, while she scrubbed floors for a man who saw her as invisible. "The guests will start arriving in a few hours," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "Yes," James agreed, watching her carefully. "They will." Something shifted in Sofia's chest, a tectonic movement of decision and resolve. She'd spent 2 years studying the wealthy, learning their codes and customs. Tonight, she could continue the performance, watch him pledge himself to another woman while she served champagne. Or she could remind them all that some games have rules they never bothered to learn. "James," she said, her voice taking on an authority that made him straighten instinctively. "When the guests arrive tonight, I want you to be ready." "Ready for what, Miss Sofia?" She turned to face him fully, and for the first time in 2 years, she let him see her completely. Not the humble housekeeper, but the tech heiress who owned everything Marcus thought belonged to his family. "Ready to help me show them who really lives here." Marcus's hand trembled slightly as he slipped the velvet box into his jacket pocket, the weight of his grandfather's engagement ring settling against his chest like a stone. The grand ballroom of Rosewood Manor gleamed under crystal chandeliers, each surface polished to perfection by Sofia's meticulous care. Guests mingled in their evening finest, champagne flutes catching the light as they moved through conversations thick with inherited privilege and calculated charm. Sofia weaved between them, carrying a silver tray of canapés, her black uniform rendering her nearly invisible among the peacock display of designer gowns and tailored suits. She'd perfected this performance. The helpful smile, the downcast eyes, the careful steps that kept her always at the periphery of their world. "Exquisite as always, Margaret," Senator Sterling was saying to Marcus's mother, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a career politician. "You've outdone yourself with tonight's arrangements." Margaret Wellington beamed, accepting credit for work Sofia had spent weeks perfecting. "One simply must maintain standards," she replied, her southern accent thickening with pleasure. "Marcus deserves only the finest for such an important evening." Sofia paused near their group, refilling glasses while watching Marcus guide Victoria toward the ballroom center. Victoria looked radiant in midnight blue silk, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon that showcased the pearl earrings her father had given her for graduation from Vassar. She moved with the unconscious confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus called out, his voice carrying easily across the room. The string quartet fell silent, and conversations died as all eyes turned toward him. Sofia found herself frozen near the champagne table, tray clutched in suddenly numb fingers. Marcus took Victoria's hand, his smile brilliant under the chandelier light. "Thank you all for joining us tonight in celebration of—" A crystal glass slipped from Sofia's tray, shattering against the marble floor with a sound like breaking bones. The room turned toward the noise, and Sofia felt heat flood her cheeks as she knelt to gather the pieces. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Marcus said, his tone carrying exasperated affection that might have sounded fond to anyone who didn't know him well. Don't worry about it. She's just the maid. The words hung in the air like smoke. Just the maid. Sofia's hands stilled on the crystal shards, their sharp edges biting into her palms. Around her, the assembled guests chuckled politely at Marcus's dismissal, already turning their attention back to the evening's main event. But something had shifted in Sofia's chest. A tectonic plate of patience, finally cracking under 2 years of accumulated slights. She straightened slowly, leaving the broken glass scattered across her own marble floor, and looked directly at Marcus for the first time in months, without hiding behind the mask of subservience. Just the maid, she repeated, her voice cutting through the ballroom's refined murmur with unexpected clarity. Marcus blinked, momentarily confused by her tone. The guest turned back toward her, faces showing mild curiosity at this breach of protocol. Victoria's intelligent eyes narrowed slightly, sensing undercurrents she couldn't yet identify. Actually, Sofia continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, I think there's something you should all know before Marcus continues with his proposal. Harrison Wellington stepped forward, his face flushing with embarrassment. Sofia, perhaps I should tell you all who really owns Rosewood Manor, Sofia interrupted, her strategic mind finally taking control. The room fell into complete silence, the kind of quiet that precedes storms. Marcus laughed, the sound forced and nervous. Sofia, what are you talking about? But even as their legal strategy succeeded, the personal costs continued mounting. Marcus had been forced to resign from his position at Wellington and Associates, the family investment firm that existed largely on paper and social connections that were rapidly evaporating. I'm thinking about teaching, he told Sofia that evening as they walked through the garden where they'd had their first honest conversation. Mathematics, maybe. Something real. Sofia studied his profile in the fading light, seeing someone she was just beginning to know. You always were good with numbers. I remember you calculating compound interest in your head during that dinner with the Hartfords. You remember everything, Marcus said, not accusingly, but with something approaching wonder. It's a gift and a curse, Sofia admitted. Sometimes I wish I could forget the way you dismissed me. Sometimes I'm grateful I remember the moments when you were genuinely kind. They reached the reflecting pool where the fountain continued its quiet song, indifferent to the human dramas playing out around it. The water caught the last light of day, creating ripples that distorted and reformed their reflections. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Marcus said quietly, but I want you to know that loving you was the most real thing I've ever felt. Even if I was too much of a coward to act on it honestly. Sofia felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that growth was possible, even for people who had caused profound hurt. The person you're becoming might deserve forgiveness, she said carefully. But that person has to be built on truth, not just good intentions. Above them, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, witnesses to a conversation that marked the end of one story and the uncertain beginning of another. 6 months after the revelation that had shattered their carefully constructed world, Rosewood Manor buzzed with a different kind of energy. The grand ballroom, where Sofia had once served champagne to Marcus's engagement party, now hosted orientation sessions for women seeking refuge from domestic violence, financial abuse, and the kind of systematic exploitation the Wellington family had experienced. Sofia stood at the same spot where she'd announced her true identity, but now she wore a simple business suit instead of a housekeeper's uniform, addressing a room full of social workers, counselors, and volunteer coordinators instead of shocked socialites. The Castellanos Foundation's mission is simple, she explained to the assembled group. We provide safe housing, legal support, and financial education to women who've been trapped by systems designed to exploit their vulnerability. The transformation of the estate had taken months of careful planning and substantial investment. The family quarters had been converted into private suites for residents. The formal dining room now served communal meals designed to build community among women recovering from trauma. And the library had become a resource center staffed with attorneys, financial advisors, and career counselors. Marcus entered from the manor's service entrance, his clothing practical rather than fashionable, carrying boxes of educational materials for the afternoon workshop. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. He now used the same entrance Sofia had used during her 2 years of deception, but without any pretense about his role or status. The mathematics literacy program materials, he said, setting down the boxes with careful precision. Over the past months, he'd discovered a talent for teaching financial concepts to women who'd been deliberately kept ignorant of their own economic situations. Their working relationship had evolved into something neither romantic nor hostile, but built on mutual respect for the work they were doing together. Sofia had offered him a position partly out of practical need for his skills, but also because she recognized his genuine commitment to redemption through service. "How did the Morrison meeting go?" Marcus asked, referring to the ongoing prosecution of the Kozlov organization. "3 more convictions," Sofia replied, with satisfaction. "The federal task force says they've dismantled the entire Northeast network." Harrison's testimony was crucial for the conspiracy charges. Harrison Wellington had found unexpected purpose in his role as a key witness against financial predators. His detailed knowledge of their operations, combined with his willingness to face public scrutiny about his family's deceptions, had made him one of the prosecution's most effective advocates. "Father seems younger," Marcus observed. "Telling the truth agrees with him." Margaret Wellington had struggled more with their new circumstances, but she'd eventually found her own path to usefulness. Her decades of social connections had proved valuable in fundraising for the foundation, and her skills in event management had made the manor's transition to a residential facility remarkably smooth. "Your mother's donor cultivation has raised nearly $2 million, Sofia told Marcus. "She has a real gift for making wealthy people feel personally invested in social justice." The afternoon brought a special visitor, Victoria Sterling, now Virginia's junior senator following her father's retirement, and her own successful campaign built on financial transparency and criminal justice reform. She'd used the knowledge gained from their shared crisis to become one of Congress's most effective advocates for banking regulation. "The Wellington-Castellanos Act passed committee yesterday," Victoria announced, referring to the legislation named in honor of Harrison's cooperation with federal investigators. "Full Senate vote expected next month." The bill would close loopholes that had allowed predatory lenders to operate through shell companies and establish federal oversight of financial institutions targeting elderly and desperate clients. It represented the transformation of their personal trauma into systemic reform. "Harrison will be thrilled," Sofia said. "He's been following every detail of the legislative process." Victoria's presence at the manor felt natural now, her relationship with the group having evolved from strategic alliance to genuine friendship. Her own journey from calculating political daughter to authentic public servant had paralleled their collective growth toward honesty and purpose. Elena arrived for her weekly visit, her medical expertise making her invaluable in assessing the mental health needs of the manor's residents. She'd taken a sabbatical from her hospital position to help establish the foundation's trauma-informed care protocols. "You're all looking insufferably satisfied with yourselves," she observed with the fond criticism of someone who'd watched her friends transform personal destruction into social good. James Chen appeared with his usual impeccable timing, carrying tea service for the group. His role had evolved from butler to foundation administrator, his organizational skills and protective instincts making him perfectly suited to managing the complex logistics of running a residential facility. "The evening program begins in 30 minutes, he announced. "Tonight's workshop focuses on investment literacy for women over 50. Sofia looked around at this group of people who'd been brought together by deception, but united by the choice to build something honest from the ruins of their lies. None of them had emerged from their crisis unchanged, but all of them had discovered that growth was possible, even after profound failure. 6 months ago, we were all pretending to be people we weren't, she reflected. Now we're actually becoming people we can respect. Through the ballroom windows, the same garden where she and Marcus had first worked through their mutual hurt was visible. But now it served as a peaceful space for residents to find moments of tranquility during their recovery process. The transformation was complete, but the work was just beginning. The morning of Sofia and Marcus's wedding dawned clear and bright, with autumn sunlight streaming through the manor's windows and casting golden patterns across floors that had witnessed so much deception and, finally, so much truth. But this wasn't the grand society wedding that might have taken place in another timeline. This was something entirely their own. Sofia stood in what had once been the master bedroom, now her private quarters within the Foundation's residential facility, wearing a simple cream dress that Elena had helped her choose. Her reflection showed someone who had integrated all aspects of herself, the tech heiress, the domestic worker, the Foundation director, into a person who no longer needed to hide any part of her identity. "You look beautiful," Elena said, adjusting Sofia's simple veil with the careful attention of someone who'd watched her friend's journey from deception to authenticity. "And happy. Really, genuinely happy." "I am," Sofia replied, surprising herself with the simple truth of it. "I never thought I'd feel safe enough to be this vulnerable again." Elena's expression grew serious. "Are you sure about this? I mean, I love Marcus's redemption arc as much as anyone. But marriage is a big step after everything you've both been through." Sofia considered the question that had kept her awake many nights during the past year. Marcus had spent 18 months proving his commitment to change through actions rather than words, working alongside her in building the Foundation, testifying in trials that had destroyed his family's social standing, and accepting a life of service instead of privilege. "I'm not marrying the man who dismissed me as just the maid," Sofia said finally. "I'm marrying the man who chose to become worthy of love instead of just expecting it." Downstairs, the garden had been transformed into an intimate ceremony space, where folding chairs held an unusual collection of guests. Former residents of the Foundation sat beside federal prosecutors who'd worked on the Kozlov case. Detective Morrison and his family occupied the front row next to Senator Victoria Sterling and her own recent husband, a public defender she'd met during their shared work on criminal justice reform. Marcus stood at the altar James had constructed near the reflecting pool, wearing a simple suit and an expression of wonder that suggested he still couldn't quite believe this moment was real. Beside him, Harrison served as best man, his own journey from shame to dignity evident in his proud posture. "Nervous?" Harrison asked his son. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "But not about marrying Sofia. About being worthy of the chance she's giving me." "Son," Harrison said with the wisdom earned through public humiliation and personal growth, "worthiness isn't something you achieve and then possess. It's something you choose to work toward every single day." The ceremony itself was brief and deeply personal. Sofia and Marcus had written their own vows, and their words reflected not just love, but hard-won understanding of what it meant to build a partnership on truth rather than performance. "I promise to see you completely," Sofia said, her voice carrying across the assembled guests. "Not the version of yourself you think I want, but the person you actually are, in all your imperfect humanity." Marcus's vows spoke to growth and accountability. "I promise to earn your trust every day, not through grand gestures but through consistent choices to prioritize honesty over comfort, service over privilege, and love over fear." Detective Morrison, who had become an unexpected friend during their shared battle against organized crime, officiated the ceremony with the practical authority of someone who'd seen what people were capable of at their worst and best. When he pronounced them married, the gathered guests erupted in applause that seemed to echo off the manor's walls, as if the house itself was celebrating this transformation from deception to authenticity. The reception took place in the same ballroom where Sofia had revealed her identity 2 years earlier, but now the space filled with genuine laughter and conversation instead of performed social grace. Margaret Wellington, resplendent in her role as mother of the groom, had organized the event with characteristic efficiency, finding joy in celebration rather than mere display. To Sofia and Marcus, James Chen offered during the toasts, his words carrying the weight of someone who'd protected them both through their darkest moments. Who proved that love built on truth is stronger than relationships built on convenience. Victoria caught Sofia's bouquet with the reflexes of a former debutante, laughing as she held the flowers aloft. Her own journey from calculating political daughter to authentic public servant had prepared her for whatever unexpected love might come next. As the evening wound down, Sofia and Marcus found themselves alone in the garden, where they'd first attempted honest conversation. The reflecting pool caught moonlight now instead of sunlight, but the fountain's quiet song remained constant. "No regrets?" Marcus asked, taking her hand with the careful reverence of someone who knew how easily trust could be broken. Sofia looked back toward the manor, where lights gleamed in windows of rooms that now housed women rebuilding their lives, where the ballroom that had witnessed their mutual deception now hosted celebrations of authentic joy. "Only that it took us so long to get here," she replied, understanding that sometimes the most circuitous path leads to the most solid ground. Above them, stars emerged in the darkening sky, witnesses to a love story that had begun with lies but would continue with the much more difficult work of daily truth. Their real life together was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Victoria adjusted her pearls with deliberate precision, a gesture that had once signaled nervous submission but now carried quiet authority. "I'm thinking about what I'd be chaining myself to. Financial security, social standing, a family with 3 centuries of breeding and connections. A family that's been living a lie for 20 years, Victoria replied coolly. A man who saw his girlfriend as furniture. A social position built entirely on debt and deception. Margaret's facade finally shattered completely. You think you can do better? Your father's political career is hanging by a thread after those defense contract scandals. You need us as much as we need you." Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt with movements that suggested she'd made a decision that had been building for months. "Actually, I think I need to figure out who I am when I'm not performing for anyone else's expectations." "You're making a mistake," Margaret warned. "Without this marriage, without our connections, you'll have nothing." "Maybe," Victoria agreed, "but at least it will be honestly nothing, instead of dishonestly everything." She moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Wellington, I think Sofia genuinely loved your son. The tragedy isn't that she deceived you, it's that you taught him to see love as service and kindness as weakness." Outside, Sofia and Marcus had reached a fragile understanding built on mutual recognition of damage done and received. Neither forgiveness nor reconciliation, but something more valuable, honest acknowledgement of what they'd both lost to the games people played with truth. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Sofia looked back toward the manor, where lights were beginning to flicker on in windows of rooms she'd cleaned 1,000 times, in a house she owned but had never truly inhabited. "Now we figure out how to live without the lies," she said. "All of us." The grandfather clock chimed 7, marking time in a world where everything familiar had already begun to change. Detective Morrison's phone buzzed with an urgency that cut through the evening quiet of Rosewood Manor. He stepped away from the others, his expression growing increasingly grim as he absorbed whatever information was being transmitted through the secure line. Sofia watched from across the study, her enhanced memory cataloging the subtle changes in his posture, the tightening of his shoulders, the way his free hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon. Years of observing human behavior had taught her to read danger signals, and Morrison was broadcasting them clearly. "We have a problem," he announced, ending the call with swift efficiency. "The financial institutions I mentioned, 3 of them have connections to Vincent Kozlov's organization." The name landed in the room like a physical blow. Even Sofia, despite her relative isolation from criminal enterprises, recognized it. Kozlov's reputation for collecting debts through methods that made bankruptcy seem appealing was legendary among New York's financial circles. "How serious a problem?" Elena asked, her medical training making her the first to move toward practical concerns. "The kind where people who know too much about his business operations tend to have accidents," Morrison replied grimly. "My investigation has been flagged by Organized Crime Task Force. Apparently our financial fraud case just became part of a much larger RICO investigation." Harrison Wellington, who had been silent since Morrison's arrival, suddenly looked even more fragile. "They've been calling," he admitted in a whisper, "ever since the engagement party. Demanding immediate payment on loans I thought had flexible terms." Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Harrison, you didn't tell me. What was I supposed to say?" He snapped. 20 years of suppressed shame, finally erupting. That I'd borrowed money from criminals? That our entire lifestyle has been funded by people who break legs for late payments? Sofia felt ice settle in her stomach. Her revelation hadn't just exposed family secrets, it had potentially painted targets on all of them. How much do you owe them? $3.7 million, Harrison said, each word seeming to cost him physical pain. With interest and penalties that keep growing. Morrison was already moving toward the window, checking sightlines with professional paranoia. We need to consider relocation for everyone involved, at least until we can determine the scope of the threat. Absolutely not, Sofia said firmly. I won't be driven from my own home by criminals preying on desperate families. Your courage is admirable, Morrison replied, but these aren't people who negotiate. Before anyone could respond, James Chen appeared in the doorway with the silent efficiency that had served him through decades of crisis management. Miss Sofia, he said quietly, there's been a delivery. He held a manila envelope marked only with the manor's address in block letters. No return address. No postmark. Hand-delivered. Morrison took the envelope with latex-gloved hands, his movements careful and deliberate. Inside was a single photograph. Harrison Wellington entering a building Sofia recognized as one of the predatory lender's offices, taken with a telephoto lens that suggested professional surveillance. On the back, someone had written, "Some debts can't be forgiven. 48 hours." The threat was clear, elegant in its simplicity, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. Pack bags, Morrison ordered. All of you. We're implementing protective custody protocols immediately. No. The voice came from an unexpected source. Victoria Sterling, who had been silent since rejoining the group. Running just confirms we're afraid. It gives them power. It keeps you alive, Morrison countered. Victoria's southern accent sharpened with determination. My father didn't raise me to run from bullies, detective. Even bullies with guns. Sofia studied Victoria with new respect. The calculating socialite was revealing depths of character that her performance as the perfect political daughter had hidden. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we fight back, Victoria said. My father may be a politician, but he's also former military. He has connections that could help. And I have information about financial irregularities in several of these lending institutions that could be useful to your investigation, Detective Morrison. Elena moved closer to Sofia, her protective instincts fully engaged. This isn't some political scandal you can spin your way out of, Victoria. These people kill for a living. Which is exactly why we can't let them win, Victoria replied. If we run now, they'll just find other families to victimize. Other people who'll be too scared or too ashamed to fight back. Sofia looked around the room at this unlikely alliance. A disgraced heir, a calculating politician's daughter, a working-class detective, a loyal butler, a fierce nurse, and herself. Not exactly the cast she would have chosen for taking on organized crime, but perhaps that was the point. Morrison, she said finally, what would you need from us to make this work? To actually bring these people down instead of just hiding from them? The detective studied her with the careful assessment of someone weighing risks against potential rewards. Evidence, cooperation, and the willingness to accept that some of you might not survive the process. Sofia thought of her parents, who had built their empire by refusing to be intimidated by people who thought money and threats were the same thing. Then we'd better make sure we succeed. Outside, night was falling over Rosewood Manor, and somewhere in the darkness, people were making plans that would test whether courage was stronger than criminal enterprise. The manor's dining room had been transformed into an impromptu war room, its mahogany table now covered with financial documents, police files, and laptops displaying intricate criminal networks. Sofia stood at the head of the table she'd served countless meals on, finally claiming her rightful place as the estate's owner, while coordinating their defense against Vincent Kozlov's organization. The pattern is clear, she said, pointing to the timeline Elena had helped construct. They target families like the Wellingtons, old money names with hidden financial problems. The prestige provides cover for money laundering, while the desperation ensures compliance. Detective Morrison nodded, his respect for Sofia's analytical mind evident in his attentive posture. My task force has been tracking this for 2 years, This is my family's estate. It's been in the Wellington family for 2 years and 3 months, Sofia said calmly. That's how long I've owned it. That's how long I've been funding its maintenance through shell companies, while you've believed it belonged to your family trust. The silence deepened, becoming something physical and oppressive. Victoria's champagne flute slipped from her fingers, joining Sofia's crystal on the marble floor. That's impossible, Margaret whispered, her carefully composed face cracking with confusion and fear. James Chen materialized at Sofia's side, carrying a leather portfolio that he placed gently on the nearest table. The deed of sale, he said quietly, his voice carrying absolute authority. Purchased by Miss Sofia Castellanos, through Castellanos Holdings for $12.7 million. Cash. Marcus stared at Sofia as if seeing her for the first time, his charming mask slipping to reveal something raw and vulnerable underneath. You're lying. You're a housekeeper. You don't have that kind of money. Sofia reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew her phone, pulling up a banking app with movements deliberately slow and precise. The screen displayed numbers that made several guests gasp audibly, an account balance that dwarfed most of their combined net worth. My name is Sofia Castellanos, she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom with quiet dignity. My parents built Castellanos Technologies from nothing. When they died 3 years ago, I inherited their company and their fortune. I bought this house to understand people like you. I became your housekeeper to study how inherited wealth shapes character. She looked directly at Marcus, letting him see the full weight of her intelligence and pain. What I learned is that some people mistake kindness for weakness and love for servitude. The engagement ring box fell from Marcus's suddenly nerveless fingers, hitting the marble with a small, final sound. Around them, the cream of Hamptons society stood frozen in a tableau of shock and dawning comprehension. Victoria was the first to move, stepping away from Marcus with the careful precision of someone navigating suddenly unstable ground. Her calculating mind was already processing implications, reassessing alliances and opportunities with ruthless efficiency. So when you say this is your house, she said slowly, her southern accent sharp with intelligence, you mean all of it. The land, the furnishings, everything, Sofia confirmed, including the debts your fiancé's family has been hiding for the past 20 years. The ballroom emptied like water through a broken dam. Guests fled with the practiced efficiency of society veterans abandoning a sinking ship, their evening gowns and tailored suits disappearing through the manor's grand entrance as quickly as dignity allowed. By midnight, only the principals remained: Sofia, Marcus, Victoria, Harrison, Margaret, and James, standing among the debris of crystal and shattered illusions. Marcus paced the length of his father's study like a caged animal, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck, his perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it. The family portraits lining the walls seemed to mock him, generations of Wellingtons who'd never had to question their place in the world. Explain this to me, he demanded, wheeling to face Sofia. Explain how the woman who's been cleaning my toilets for 2 years is actually some tech heiress. Explain how you've been lying to me every single day. Sofia sat in Harrison's leather chair, her posture straight despite the uniform she still wore. The contrast was jarring, the domestic help commanding the master's study while the supposed heir raged before family portraits he had no right to inherit. The same way you've been lying about your family's finances, she replied calmly. The same way your father has been lying about the trust fund that doesn't exist. The same way your mother has been lying about the social standing you can't afford to maintain. Harrison Wellington aged 10 years in that moment, his shoulders sagging under the weight of exposure. The proud patriarch who'd once commanded boardrooms now looked like what he'd become. A desperate man drowning in deceptions. How did you know? He whispered. Sofia's enhanced memory provided perfect recall of financial documents glimpsed during her cleaning duties, bank statements carelessly left open, whispered phone calls with creditors that she'd overheard and cataloged. Shell companies need transparency with property owners. I've seen every invoice, every loan document, every threat from creditors. You've been living on borrowed time for 20 years. Margaret Wellington sank into a chair, her elegant facade crumbling like old plaster. The Vanderbilt wedding. The charity galas. The country club membership, how could we give all that up? So you didn't, Sofia said, her voice holding more pity than anger. You created an elaborate fiction instead. Sold the real estate quietly, borrowed against insurance policies, even took out loans using the manor as collateral, except you didn't own the manor to use as collateral. Victoria Sterling had remained silent throughout the exchange, her intelligent eyes moving between speakers, like someone following a particularly complex chess match. Finally, she spoke. The engagement, she said slowly. You needed my family's political connections to secure more funding. My father's position on the banking committee could have opened doors. Marcus stopped pacing, his face flushing with shame and anger. Victoria, that's not. Of course it is, she interrupted, her southern charm evaporating to reveal steel underneath. Just like I needed your family's social standing to legitimize my own political ambitions. We're both victims of the same game, Marcus. At least Sofia had the decency to fall in love honestly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The accusation hung in the air between them. Sofia felt something twist in her chest, part vindication, part pain. Had she fallen in love honestly? Or had her deception made authentic feeling impossible from the start? James Chen stepped forward, placing a manila folder on Harrison's desk with the deliberate care of someone delivering a verdict. The complete financial picture, he said quietly. Outstanding debts, interest obligations, and foreclosure timelines. Harrison opened the folder with trembling fingers, his face growing paler with each page. Numbers didn't lie the way people did, and the numbers painted a picture of complete financial ruin. 18 months, he said finally. Maybe less before the creditors force liquidation. Unless, Sofia said, standing and smoothing her uniform skirt with hands that betrayed none of the turmoil in her chest, certain arrangements are made. Marcus turned to her with desperate hope and barely controlled rage warring in his expression. What kind of arrangements? Sofia studied him. This man she'd thought she loved. This beautiful, charming, fundamentally weak person who'd never had to build anything or fight for anything, or choose between comfort and truth. I could buy out your family's debts, she said. Restore your social standing. Give you back the life you think you deserve. What would you want in return? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sofia looked around the study, at the family that had taken her genuine affection and treated it as service, at the portraits of ancestors who'd built something real before their descendants squandered it. She thought of her parents, who'd fought for every success, who'd taught her that dignity came from effort, not inheritance. Truth, she said simply. Complete, brutal honesty. From all of you. About everything. Marcus laughed bitterly. You want to talk about honesty? You've been playing dress-up as our housekeeper for 2 years, manipulating our feelings, using us as some kind of anthropological study. I used a false identity, Sofia acknowledged. But my feelings were real. My work was real. The care I showed for this house and this family was real. Can you say the same about anything in your life? The question silenced him. In the heavy quiet that followed, Sofia could hear the grandfather clock marking time, each tick measuring the seconds between the lies that had defined their relationship and whatever truth might come next. Victoria broke the silence. I think, she said carefully, that we all need to decide who we want to be now that our masks are off. Sofia nodded, looking each of them in the eye. Starting tonight, no more deceptions. No more performances. If we're going to move forward, any of us, it has to be built on something real. Outside, dawn was beginning to touch the windows of Rosewood Manor, casting long shadows across a room where everything had changed and nothing could ever go back to the way it was before. Detective Ray Morrison arrived at Rosewood Manor as the morning sun burned away the last traces of the previous night's fog. His unmarked sedan looked out of place in the circular drive, its practical lines incongruous among the carefully maintained hedges and marble statuary that spoke of old money and older secrets. Sofia watched from the morning room window as he stepped out of the car, noting the way his eyes cataloged details. The expensive landscaping, the freshly painted shutters, the subtle signs of wealth maintained beyond reasonable means. Morrison had the observational skills of someone who'd spent years following paper trails through financial labyrinths, and Sofia realized with a cold twist of recognition that their troubles were far from over. "Detective Morrison," James announced from the doorway, his professional composure intact despite the previous night's revelations. "He says it's regarding financial irregularities connected to the estate." Sofia exchanged glances with Marcus, who sat across from her at the breakfast table they'd never shared as equals before. The dynamic between them had shifted overnight, not back to romance, but toward something more complex, wary allies, perhaps, bound by shared exposure. "Show him to the study," Sofia said, then caught herself. Old habits of deference died hard, even in her own house. Morrison proved to be exactly what Sofia had expected, mid-40s, methodical, with the patient manner of someone who understood that financial crimes were solved through persistence rather than inspiration. His handshake was firm, his questions direct. "Miss Castellanos," he said, settling into the chair Harrison had vacated, "I'm investigating a series of fraudulent loan applications that appear to trace back to this property. Your name came up as the current owner." "What kind of fraud?" Sofia asked, though her enhanced memory was already connecting dots that painted an unpleasant picture. Morrison opened his briefcase and withdrew a stack of documents. "Someone has been using Rosewood Manor as collateral for multiple loans over the past 5 years. The applications show different ownership structures, different contact information, but the same property address." Harrison Wellington entered the study at that moment, his face gray with exhaustion and something approaching defeat. He'd aged a decade overnight, the weight of exposed lies transforming him from distinguished patriarch to broken old man. "Those would be mine," he said quietly, accepting Morrison's sharp attention with weary resignation. "Mr. Wellington," Morrison said, his tone shifting into official interrogation mode. "Are you saying you knowingly submitted false information to secure loans, using property you didn't own?" "I thought I owned it," Harrison replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "My father always told me the manor would be mine. I never questioned the trust documentation until—" He gestured helplessly toward Sofia, who felt an unexpected stab of sympathy for this man who'd built his entire identity on a foundation of inherited lies. Morrison's attention shifted between them, his professional instincts clearly triggered by the complexity of the situation. "Miss Castellanos, were you aware that your property was being used as collateral when you purchased it?" "No," Sofia said truthfully. "But I've since discovered that several of the loans Mr. Wellington secured were with institutions that have been flagged for predatory lending practices." She produced her own folder, research she'd conducted in the early hours of the morning while the others slept. Hartwell Financial Services, Coastal Capital Holdings, Empire Trust Corporation. All of them have been investigated for targeting elderly clients with complex financial schemes. Morrison's expression sharpened with interest. "You've been investigating on your own?" "I've been trying to understand the full scope of the situation," Sofia replied carefully. "What I found suggests that Mr. Wellington may have been as much a victim as a perpetrator." The study door opened again, and Elena Vasquez burst in with the force of a small hurricane. Sofia's best friend looked like she'd driven through the night, her scrubs wrinkled, her dark hair escaping from its ponytail, her eyes blazing with the protective fury that had gotten her through nursing school and 3 tours with Doctors Without Borders. "Sofia Maria Castellanos," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd known Sofia since freshman orientation at Stanford. "What the hell have you been doing?" Morrison raised an eyebrow at this interruption, but Sofia felt some of the tension in her chest ease. Elena's presence was like an anchor to reality, a reminder of who she'd been before she'd lost herself in this elaborate game of deception. "Elena," Sofia said, standing to embrace her friend, "I didn't expect you until this afternoon." "I got your message at 3 a.m., Elena replied, her fierce hug conveying both relief and exasperation. "Something about revealing your identity and needing emotional support. I drove straight from Boston." She turned to survey the room, taking in Morrison's official presence, Harrison's defeated posture, and Marcus, who hovered near the windows with the uncertain air of someone who no longer knew his place in the world. "And you must be the boyfriend who didn't know he was dating a billionaire," Elena said to Marcus, her tone carrying the particular disdain she reserved for men who disappointed her friends. "Ex-boyfriend," Marcus corrected quietly. Apparently. Elena's expression softened slightly. She had too much professional experience with trauma to miss the genuine confusion and pain in his voice. But her primary loyalty remained with Sofia. "Detective," she said, acknowledging Morrison with the brisk courtesy of someone accustomed to dealing with authority figures. "I hope you're not here to arrest my friend for the crime of being lied to." Morrison's slight smile suggested he appreciated Elena's directness. "Actually, I'm more interested in the possibility that she and Mr. Wellington here might both be victims of a larger scheme." He pulled out another document, this one showing a complex web of financial connections that made Sofia's head spin despite her business background. "The institutions that Mr. Wellington borrowed from? They're all subsidiaries of a larger organization that specializes in exactly this kind of situation. They target wealthy families in financial distress, offer complicated loan products, then use the confusion to extract maximum value before forcing foreclosure." Sofia felt a chill of recognition. "You're saying they knew the manor didn't belong to the Wellington family?" "I'm saying they may have deliberately created a situation where multiple parties would have claims on the same property, then sat back to see which one could pay them the most to make their problems go away." The implications of Morrison's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. What had seemed like a family's private shame was actually part of a larger criminal enterprise, one that had been using their pain and deception as raw material for profit. Elena moved to Sofia's side, her protective instincts clearly triggered. "What does this mean for Sofia?" Morrison closed his briefcase with deliberate care. "It means that things are about to get a lot more complicated before they get simpler." The estate gardens stretched before them in the late afternoon light, rose bushes casting long shadows across manicured paths where Sofia and Marcus had once walked as lovers. Now they moved with the careful distance of former enemies attempting neutrality, neither quite sure how to navigate this new territory between them. "I keep thinking about that first day," Marcus said, breaking the silence that had settled between them since leaving the manor. "When I found you replanting Mother's orchids. You knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you?" Sofia's fingers trailed along the stone balustrade that overlooked the reflecting pool. "My mother had a greenhouse. She taught me that plants reveal character. How someone tends something vulnerable says everything about who they really are." "And what did I reveal?" His voice carried genuine curiosity rather than his usual defensiveness. "That you cared about something beyond yourself," Sofia replied honestly. "For about 30 minutes I thought I'd found someone real." Marcus stopped walking, his hands clenched at his sides. "When did that change? When did you decide I was just another entitled rich boy worth studying like a lab specimen?" The question cut deeper than Sofia expected. She turned to face him, seeing past the defensive anger to the genuine hurt underneath. "The night you introduced me to the Ashfords. You laughed when Catherine asked if I had opinions about the art collection, then said housekeepers weren't paid to think. I don't remember that." "You wouldn't," Sofia said, her voice gentle despite the pain in the memory. "It was casual cruelty. The kind that comes so naturally, you don't even notice it anymore." They reached the garden's center, where a marble fountain tinkled softly in the evening air. Marcus sat heavily on its edge, his perfect posture finally abandoning him. "My whole life has been a lie," he said quietly. "The trust fund, the family fortune, even this engagement to Victoria, all of it built on nothing." "Not nothing," Sofia corrected. "Built on your parents' fear of losing status. Built on the assumption that appearing wealthy was more important than being honest." Marcus looked up at her, with something that might have been hope. "The money you offered to pay our debts, was that real? Would it matter if it was?" "I think," he said slowly, "that I'm finally understanding the difference between having money and earning respect." Meanwhile, inside the manor, Margaret Wellington cornered Victoria in the drawing room with the desperate intensity of a woman watching her carefully constructed world collapse. Margaret's usual refined composure had cracked, revealing the calculating survivor underneath. "You can't seriously be considering ending the engagement," Margaret said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Think about what you're throwing away. You've given us more useful intelligence in 12 hours than we've gathered in 6 months of surveillance." Marcus looked up from the loan documents he'd been reviewing, his face pale with the scope of his family's entanglement. "There are names here I recognize. The Ashfords, the Binghams, the Cavendishes. Half the families at last month's charity gala are involved, which explains how they've operated so long without detection," Victoria added, her political instincts sharp as ever. "Social standing provides perfect camouflage. No one suspects the yacht club's set of running money for Russian organized crime." Elena, who had appointed herself the group's voice of practical concern, looked up from her laptop where she'd been researching Kozlov's enforcement methods. "This is all fascinating, but people who cross this man tend to disappear. Permanently. Are we sure we want to poke this particular bear?" "The bear is already awake," Sofia replied grimly. "Harrison's debts have made us targets whether we cooperate with the investigation or not. At least this way, we have a chance of stopping them." James Chen entered carrying a tea service, his presence providing its usual calming influence on the charged atmosphere. "Miss Sofia," he said quietly, "perhaps this would be an appropriate time to discuss the security measures I've implemented." Sofia raised an eyebrow. "Security measures? I took the liberty of contacting certain associates from my previous employment," James explained, with the careful precision of someone revealing classified information. "Before entering domestic service, I spent 20 years with British intelligence. Some connections remain useful." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this revelation. Morrison was the first to speak. "Your MI6?" "Was," James corrected. "But retirement doesn't necessarily end all obligations, especially when civilians I care about face criminal threats." Sofia felt a rush of gratitude for this man who had protected her in ways she'd never imagined. "What kind of security measures?" "Discreet surveillance of the property perimeter, electronic countermeasures against listening devices, and a few individuals positioned to observe and report on any unusual activity in the area." Victoria leaned forward with interest. "Could these associates of yours help us gather evidence against Kozlov's organization?" "Perhaps," James replied, "though any such cooperation would need to be carefully coordinated with Detective Morrison's official investigation." Morrison's expression suggested he was reassessing everyone in the room. "This keeps getting more complicated." "Sometimes complicated is good," Sofia said, thinking of her parents' advice about building businesses in competitive markets. "It makes us harder to predict and harder to eliminate." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window with nervous energy. "What about my parents? They're not equipped for this kind of danger. My mother thinks the greatest threat to our family is being dropped from the country club membership list." "Your parents are safer here than anywhere else," Morrison assured him. "Kozlov's people want them functional and able to pay. Dead debtors can't make payments." "How reassuring," Margaret Wellington said dryly from the doorway. She entered with Harrison behind her, both looking like they'd aged years in the past few days. "I suppose this is what comes of associating with criminals." "You've been associating with criminals for 5 years," Sofia reminded her gently. "We're just the first ones to fight back." Harrison moved to stand beside his son, and Sofia noticed how Marcus instinctively straightened, drawing strength from his father's presence despite everything that had been revealed. "What do you need from us?" Harrison asked, addressing the room with something approaching his old authority. "Your loan documents, your communications with the lending institutions, any recordings or photographs you might have from meetings," Morrison replied, "and your testimony when this goes to trial." "You're assuming we'll live long enough for a trial," Elena muttered. Victoria stood, her decision clearly made. "I'm calling my father tonight. Senator Sterling chairs the Banking Oversight Committee, and he has contacts in federal law enforcement that could expedite this investigation. That could put your family at risk too," Sofia warned. Victoria's smile was sharp with determination. My family has been dealing with political threats since before I was born. At least this time we'll be fighting for something that matters. Sofia looked around the table at this extraordinary collection of people who had somehow become her allies in a battle she'd never intended to fight. A week ago, they'd been playing elaborate games of social deception. Now they were risking their lives for each other's survival. "All right," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd inherited more than money from her parents. "Let's see if we can turn their own system against them." Outside, the manor's grounds were being watched by both criminals and guardians, while inside, an unlikely alliance prepared to take on an enemy that had grown comfortable operating in the shadows of respectable society. The real game was just beginning. The press conference took place on the manor's front steps at precisely 10 a.m., with Sofia standing behind a podium bearing the Castellanos Technologies logo while cameras captured every word. The assembled reporters had expected a standard corporate announcement, not the explosive revelation that was about to reshape their understanding of Hampton society's financial foundations. "My name is Sofia Castellanos," she began, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd with quiet authority. 2 years ago, I purchased Rosewood Manor from a consortium of predatory lenders, who had been using it as collateral for fraudulent loans targeting financially distressed families. The crowd stirred with interest, phones appearing as reporters sensed a major story developing. Behind Sofia, Marcus stood with his parents, their unified presence a deliberate signal that they were facing this crisis together. "The Wellington family believed they owned this estate through inheritance," Sofia continued. "In reality, their financial difficulties had been deliberately exploited by criminal organizations that profit from desperation and shame." Detective Morrison stepped forward, his badge clearly visible as he addressed the cameras. "This morning, federal agents executed search warrants on 17 financial institutions connected to the Kozlov crime family. The evidence provided by the Wellington family and Miss Castellanos has been instrumental in exposing a money laundering operation that has victimized dozens of prominent families." Marcus moved to the podium, his hands trembling slightly as he faced the assembled press. The entitled air of weeks ago had been replaced by someone who understood the weight of public accountability. "I want to apologize," he said, his voice carrying genuine remorse. "To Sofia, who deserved honesty instead of deception. To my family, who I failed by living a lie instead of facing our problems. And to everyone who believed in a version of me that never really existed." The personal cost of their revelations was immediately apparent. Marcus's phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from former friends distancing themselves from the scandal. Social invitations were being rescinded, business connections severed, memberships to exclusive clubs quietly terminated. "Worth it," Victoria said firmly, watching from the manor's front window as the press conference concluded. She'd arrived that morning with Senator Sterling, whose political machinery was already working to turn the investigation into a larger crusade against financial corruption. "Easy for you to say," Margaret Wellington replied bitterly. "You still have your father's political connections to fall back on." Victoria turned to face the older woman with compassion rather than anger. "Mrs. Wellington, I've spent my entire life performing for other people's expectations. This is the first time I've ever done something because it was right instead of because it was advantageous." The truth of Victoria's words was evident in the changes already visible throughout the manor. The desperate tension that had characterized the Wellington family's interactions was being replaced by something more honest, if not necessarily more comfortable. Harrison had thrown himself into cooperation with the federal investigation, with the energy of a man finally free to tell the truth. His detailed knowledge of the predatory lending network's operations was proving invaluable to investigators, and his willingness to testify was giving other victims the courage to come forward. 18 families so far, he reported to Sofia during their afternoon strategy session. The Ashfords, the Cavendishes, even the old Boston Brahmins like the Lowells. All of us trapped in the same web of debt and deception. Sofia nodded, understanding that their public revelation had opened floodgates they couldn't close. Morrison says the task force expects dozens more to come forward once word spreads. And Kozlov's organization? 3 arrests this morning, Sofia replied, including 2 of the loan officers who handled your case. The federal prosecutors are confident they can flip them for testimony against the higher-level operatives.